Yeah, I can work with this. Alright, I'm finally making a Spamtale video. I had no idea what it was. At first I thought it was just an Undertale mod, which I am absolutely going to play once it's finished because it just looks like it'd be interesting, and I'm already too far deep into that rabbit hole. The Spamtale that Hound Dog Animates from my last theory video wanted is not an Undertale mod, or at least I'm assuming not, because that's not as interesting as going over the story of Spamton G. Spamton. Yep, that's the video, and to make things easier for me to talk about, because I'm mostly doing this unscripted, I have set up a sort of like core-esque, like, you know, connecting the lines between different points, sort of deal. You know, I'll be making that in real time to try and make it easier to understand, but just know that just about every point on there matters for one reason or another.
2 hours later.
Alright, so I'm a fucking idiot. I had set up all this crazy shit to try and explain like Spamton story. You can barely see anything because I circled so much shit so much, but I can salvage this. So I'm gonna look at Spamton. So obviously first thing you gotta do is figure out who Spamton is. He's the email guy on the laptop. Keep in mind he is not the laptop because that is Queen. He's just the email on there. Whether he's like the spam folder or whatever, it doesn't really matter. He's just, that seems to be what he is, and given the context clues in chapter 2, that seems to be the case. Then Spamton becomes an Addison, or at least a salesman, and becomes moderately successful. My theory for this is that the Knight somehow got involved, not too crazily because I don't like talking about the Knight too much, and then led to Spamton getting a Shadow Crystal. That's Shadow Crystal there, I'll write it over here, just Shadow Crystal. Shadow Crystal. This led to that. And here's the thing. This theory, and not really theory, but this explanation still works without the Shadow Crystal's involvement in being with Spamton. So if you 100% believe Sham and everything else about the Shadow Crystal being with the robot here that becomes Spamton Neo, just remove the Shadow Crystal from the equation and it'll still make sense. So, looking at the Shadow Crystal, since my last theory video I talk about how the Shadow Crystals tell the future, I would assume that Spamton sees his future, sees that he becomes a big shot I wrote right here, and so it goes from being the email guy to being an Addison / salesman, and then one day Chris and Azrael, I'm using Ralsei as a placeholder because we don't have a Deltarune Azrael sprite just yet, and I'm too lazy to go to the Undertale sprite database to. I'm too lazy to go to the sprite's resource for Undertale sprites to get Azrael, so this is what you get. And ended up taking the laptop home. I don't know if it was just Chris and Azrael, but it could also be just the Dreamers in general. And we know this because in Creepy Game number 3 in Chapter 3 of Deltarune, Tenna talks about how someone, we assume is Spamton, was supposed to teach him how to be a big shot. But he got a phone call and had to leave. But when Tenna went to go ahead and pick up the phone, it was already hung up, so he didn't get anything from it. So Tenna hates Spamton. And it's clear that Spamton also hates Tenna because of his line about not trusting everything you see on TV. Now, as for Mike, how Mike fits into all of this is because if Mike is just a microphone at the Dreamer house and the laptop with email on there, which would mean Spamton was at the Dreamer house, was taken to the Dreamer house, then Mike would also be there to mess with Spamton. Then, of course, there's also the idea that Mike is just a physical microphone, which could still work, although that one would definitely need a bit of ironing out in order to fully work. So we'll stick with that. And the thing is with Darkners is that it's very clear that they can interact with their environment even if the room is lit up. I mean, Tenna has memories of being watched by the Dreamers and even the Holidays. So, you know, it makes sense. And I don't think there were any dark fountains in the Dreamer home before Chapter 3. We don't have any evidence to support that. So, Spamton interacting with both Mike and Tenna makes sense. Also, just ignore Trashy here. I only brought him up because I had an idea about Spamton being the Clippy knockoff, but clearly Trashy was because his name was literally Trashy, so just ignore that. And then, of course, after that, Spamton, I would assume that after visiting the Dreamer house and the laptop, Spamton finally begins to fall off and was a big shot, but now he isn't, and he's living in the dumpster. And I want to make this clear right now, this has nothing to do with the video, but the fuck is text? What was I saying again? Oh yeah, this has nothing to do with the video or anything like that, but if I hear any more of these like fucking like Hustle University Sigma male grindset fuckers talking about like how we should see Spamton, who is very likely a fraud, as inspiration for becoming a big shot because he lives in the garbage, but he's still a salesman. I'm going to commit regicide. I'm not going to kill a king. No, I'm going to kill everyone in the world named Reggie. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you are. If your name is Reggie, I'm going to kill you. Anyways, back to it. So Spamton is living in the garbage. That's when one of two things happens. Either they meet Chris, or they meet Chris and Noelle. Now, if they meet Chris, if he meets Chris, then he just has them get the disc for the robot, which would become Spamton Neo, gives it back to Spamton, and then Spamton goes to Queen's mansion in order to, well, I guess Spamton doesn't go there, but, Spamton has Chris take him there, and then he becomes what he believes is a true big shot, which obviously we know is false because, he still had the strings, things, he's a puppet, basically, and I guess that's kind of the whole point of why Hound Dog Animates wanted me to talk about this because of the whole puppet analogy but the thing is, if I were to talk about the whole puppet analogy, I would need to go more in depth about the shadow crystals and the characters that have affected them. So that will be a future video, but just know that I will be more than happy to talk about that. As for now, of course, we know that Spamton gets defeated by Chris and the rest of the Fun Gang, and then ends up becoming either the Deal Maker or Puppet Scarf. Just like how Jevil became either the Jevil's Knife or the Jevil's Tail. But let's say we do the weird route and we say fuck no to peace being an option, which definitely for the best, because, I mean, Jivel's knife is way better for fighting this fucker right here. And the Dealmaker is also really good for fighting this fucker right here. Point is, I'm getting off track. Okay, so let's say Chris decides, or, you know, not really Chris, but, you know, we decide to, you know, kind of take advantage of Chris a little bit, and we, you know, go the weird route. We still meet Spamton at the dumpster, but Noelle is there, and she gets the thorn ring, and then, you know, she quote-unquote kills Birdley, and goes back to Queen's Mansion. Then I guess with all of the craziness going on with basically everyone in the Cyber City being turned into, you know, ice sculptures, that would allow Spamton to get into Queen's Mansion, and then get to his new body. You can barely see that. Hold on, let me just change the color so it's easier to see. So Spamton goes into Queen's Mansion. I chose the wrong fucking color. Alright. Spamton goes into Queen's Mansion, gets his new body, and then still gets defeated by Chris because, you know, we all know how that goes down. I guess technically it was Noelle, but point is, still gets defeated and you still get the puppet scarf. Alright, so does that kind of make sense? So, one more time, sent an emo guy, then he becomes a salesman, then he meets Mike and Tenna. That's when he starts living down in the dumpsters. You know, the dumpsters. And then meets Chris, or Chris and Noelle, which ultimately leads to him going to Queen's Mansion. Then he becomes a big shot, but he's still, you know, just a puppet on a string. And in the end, regardless of if it's consensual or not, he is going to help Chris break free from their own strings. That concludes my TED Talk, and I swear to God, if this has not been recording my audio this entire time, I am going to commit regicide. And by that I do mean I'm going to kill a king. So yeah, that's Spamtale for you. I hope this video was informative enough. I really wish the audio was recorded my first time going over that, because it would have made things way easier, but point is, the whole thing with Spamton is, Spamton on his own is not really all that big of a subject for me to go over, because so much of the stuff that I would have loved to talk about, which regards Spamton, also involves the other Shadow Crystal bosses in Deltarune's chapters 1 through 4. So I'm going to make another video talking about all of them on an individual level, and that will allow me to go more in depth on the whole puppet thing. So stay tuned for that. If there's any other stuff, topics you would want me to talk about, leave it down in the comments, and I will see you when I see you. So I don't know how the fuck I missed this, but, you know, the phone call that Spamton had, I don't think the phone call really means much of anything. Honestly, what I would assume is that whoever it is that's creating the fountains, because I don't think the knight is necessarily the one making the fountains, although they could be. Point is, whoever it is making these fountains and is doing these things, and very clearly has some form of malicious intent, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the person who called Spamton. We don't know who called him, and for all we know, it could be Gaster, but I don't know. I don't know. I feel like blaming Gaster for everything that we don't know is really fucking stupid. So I don't know. If you know who could have been on the phone with Spamton, please let me know. I'm genuinely at a loss for that one. My only real guess is that it was probably maybe some other Addison or something like that. Maybe whether it be an Addison that's kind of telling him that he's been made obsolete either by said Addison's efforts to, you know, become a better salesman, or just, you know, like, hey man, I thought I'd let you know that, yeah, your sales are in the dumps now, or something like that. That's the best I have though, so I am sorry about not mentioning the phone call earlier. It was just so, I just don't have any real information on it, and like I said, I like to include viewer participation, so, you know, if you got any ideas, leave it in the comments. Alright, and now I'm done for real.